Silver Dust, a Queen's Wraith prequel by G.K. Lund. Chapter 1. Nadia Navarra reached out toward the banister on the main staircase to steady herself. In any other place, that was not out of the ordinary, but there in the bowels of the cube, the headquarters of the Queen's Wraiths, she knew she was one curious look away from being noticed. She could not be noticed. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. With a calm and decisive move, she removed her hand and remained still, focusing while keeping her face blank, trying her best not to pass out from pain and exhaustion. Wraiths milled around her, all of them drawn to the common area where they were now about to attend an assembly. This in itself was unusual, but the rumors out in the city of Agartha were already known to everyone. The Wraiths, one of the Queen's guards in the city, tasked with protecting the border, and the citizens from supernatural threats, were a close unit of hundreds of independent enforcers. It was a bit of an oxymoron, but it had always worked for them. The cube, the large cubic building made of dark granite, aptly and unimaginatively named for its appearance, housed them all and therefore also housed all of their necessities, from sleeping areas to training rooms, a smithy in the basement, as well as a vast research library. Nadia, though, was headed to the common areas which spread out around the main entrance. It was an open space that contained little more than columns and benches. That was it. Wraiths were industrious people who had learned since childhood that sitting down was not always necessary, yet how Nadia longed to sit down now. Lying down was even more of a dream. Slowly, she continued her descent, pretending to watch the large crowd of Wraiths, hundreds of them, now packed into the common area. They had no particular uniform except that they all dressed in dark clothes, carried the weapons of their choosing, usually blade weapons or crossbows. Common to them all were the long, black coats they used. They were blended with wool, which made them useful even as makeshift blankets in a pinch, and also helped conceal them if needed in the dark. Nadia was dressed much the same, though her slightly too large coat was buttoned up, so her dagger didn't show at the moment. She carried her sword with pride. The Wraiths had bestowed it upon her a few months ago. At 17, she was old enough to get her own now. Bolt Wraiths like her, apprenticed to the Wraiths, usually did around that age when they wouldn't grow much more. She'd fastened it on her hip, but the scabbard stuck out through a strategically placed slit in her coat. "Think this is about that Tricandis case?" Nadia jumped a little and felt nauseous when losing control for even a second. She glanced sideways and saw Atherton and Corin approach her in the throng of Wraiths. "We usually only have these types of announcements if it's serious, don't we?" she responded, forcing her words out to be heard in the buzz of voices. Nadia wore her dark hair down instead of tied back. It helped conceal her face a little. She'd looked in the mirror before coming downstairs and she was too pale. She wasn't sure if rubbing a bit of blush on her cheekbones did anything to rectify the matter. "True," Atherton said, and stretched to see over all the people in front of them who were doing the same. He was a tall young man with short hair and a lighter hue than Nadia's. He carried his preferred short swords on his back, and at a few years older, Atherton had been made a shield wraith already. Nadia was on the cusp of that, too. Gaining the rank of shield meant she would become a wraith in her own right, no longer an apprentice. If she could make it through this day, of course. The Wraiths valued loyalty above all else, and so did she. But there were many kinds of loyalty. Today, friendships and doing the right thing was at stake. Why did she have to be in such a poor state now? Wraiths never showed weakness. They didn't argue, and they trusted each other implicitly. They were all trained and raised together from the age of 12. Nadia shouldn't be holding things back from them. "Everyone here!" a man shouted over the crowd. The Wraiths were nothing if not disciplined. No one answered him, but everyone quieted and turned their attention to him. Nadia had to step up on her toes to see Sarker, the Blade Wraith, the highest official among the Wraiths. If he was here, talking to them, then it was bad. Of course, Nadia already knew that better than most. She eased down and settled for listening, not seeing. She stared blindly into the back of a shield wraith in front of her, feeling the press of others around her. Normally, she felt nothing but safe among them, but hiding her physical ailments was difficult. Her only relief was the various techniques the Wraiths had taught her over the years to be able to keep in position for a long time while hunting down rogue beasts. This was the main responsibility of the Shadow Wraiths, of course, the rank above Shield, but no one got that far without the basic knowledge they all learned. Nadia eased her breathing, and like she'd been taught with the Shade, the borderland outside the city of Agartha, she pushed the pain and unease back and listened while in a half-trance. "You've all heard the rumors," the Blade shouted. Wraiths seldom did so. Raising one's voice was usually emotional and rash. When a Wraith shouted, it was to truly be heard, and when it happened, all of them listened. "We have confirmation. A werewolf-vampire hybrid roams the city." In any other crowd, gasps and outcries would have erupted at such horrifying news. Not among the Queen's Wraiths. They were silent as, well, Wraiths, as the saying went in Agartha. Both werewolves and vampires lived peacefully in the city, at least on paper, especially for the latter group. Nadia herself was proof of that, being a half-breed werewolf. But as a half-breed, she could not shift into a lupine form. Her human half was too much for the wolf to battle. It gave her added strength and enhanced senses, though, and standing so close to everyone else, in her half-trance, she heard the steady heartbeats of her fellow Wraiths who were doing the same thing she was. Only the odd bolt had elated pulse and breaths. "I'm sure you all understand the severity of this," the Blade went on. Nadia did. She'd grown up in Calmont Hollow her first 12 years, the district in the city where the werewolves lived. Hybrids were the creatures of legends that were told to scare children from misbehaving. Beware, or a vampire will turn you into a hybrid. She'd never believed it because it simply wasn't done. Werewolves and vampires hated each other on principle, and forcing them into the same body was to wreak havoc on the werewolf in question's mind. He has killed people in the city, and roams the Shade too. We do not know what he wants, or if he even knows that himself. The boy is raving mad. You've all heard the name Tricandis. The moniker was attributed to him over in that recent tiny Earthside settlement when he murdered 5 of their people. I hardly need to emphasize the importance of stopping this abomination. Such hybrids should not exist, and we see why now. "Do we know who he is?" a voice asked from the front. Yes. Nadia wanted to close her eyes, to shut all the noise out. But that could be noticed. She needed to not be noticed. Not today. Everything seemed to hurt. Even her legs, which were supposed to keep her upright. Her head had a slight pressure in it too, and she was too nauseous to eat. Could they not hurry up? He shows all his sides, including the human one. We believe he has little, if any, control over this. But as a hybrid, we know he was a werewolf originally. So he must have been turned by a vampire who lost control of their progeny. As opposed to a few other realms, Agarthan werewolves could not turn anyone into their species by biting them. They had to be born werewolves, which was why they took such pride in who could shift form or not. Nadia and her brother Nikolai had not been high in that hierarchy since they couldn't show their heritage in that way. The Wraiths had been more welcoming in that regard. "From what our shadows found out," the Blade Wraith went on, "he is a young werewolf, no more than 17, by the name of Darrow Region. He comes from Calmont Hollow. Full-blooded, lived with his mother who claims she hasn't seen him in weeks." Nadia noticed a slight frown on Atherton's face, watching him out of the corner of her eye now. He was struggling to remember something. She was sure of it. Since he'd advanced to the rank of Shield a couple of years back, he'd had other duties and not spent that much time with the Bolts. Corinne, standing on his other side, had as blank a mask as any of the surrounding Wraiths. But then, she was a few years younger than Nadia, and might not remember. Nadia couldn't afford for anyone to recall anything. She needed to distance herself from this. A muffled question was asked far to the left in the crowd. "Yes!" the Blade shouted back, apparently having heard the words. Like all of Calmont Hollow, she despises these creatures. He might be her son, but he will find no sanctuary there. Still, we have shadows watching the place as we speak, just to be sure. Nadia felt a dizzy spell come over her and stared daggers into the back of the shield in front of her, willing herself not to pass out. She only needed to hold on, lower her pulse, breathe. What we have to do now is put all other assignments on hold and spread out all over the city. People are dying, and there will be an uproar if we do not act. No Wraith, no matter your rank, goes alone. The Bolts are to join. Take a few each and watch over them. Under no circumstance will any Bolt engage with the hybrid. They are only to help search. No one but full Wraiths will do anything. Understood? Silent nods were his confirmation that his order had been heard and received. Good. Then I want you to spread out across the city, the farmlands, and the shade within the hour. The specters will assign you areas on your way out. The crowd dispersed with no questions. Despite the severity and unusual danger of this assignment, they had been trained for this, even the Bolts. Nadia took a quick step back and let herself be swallowed by the slow-moving crowd before Atherton could see her and remember to ask a question. They'd been Bolts together for too long for her to think he wouldn't remember with a little prompting. But what had been a friendship when Atherton was a Bolt had been a relationship after he became a Shield. He shouldn't have observed too much of it, considering it wasn't his business. Nadia could only hope that timeline didn't betray her. "Nadia!" A hand landed on her shoulder and she moved to the side to avoid the touch and see who it was. "Dr. Pernier?" she said, and breathed out. The middle-aged man was not Atherton come to question her. "You don't look all that good, Bolt." "I'm better, I promise." The doctor eyed her with open doubt. He was one of the few civilians who worked in the building, and with his light gray shirt tucked into dark blue pants, he stuck out in the crowd of darkness. "I'm not sure you should take part in this. Come with me," he told her and turned, expecting her to follow. Nadia wanted to bolt. She didn't have time for this, but then she spotted Atherton back in the crowd, who were all moving in the same direction, back toward the main stairs. Nadia followed the doctor and went with him down the stairs instead of up where she needed to go. 5 minutes later, she sat on a chair in his office, which had the door open out to the ward. There was an unusual amount of Wraiths occupying the beds there. The lich fever, which had made its rounds through the city for the last couple of months, still had its clutches hooked inside the cube. "No wonder, really," Dr. Pernier said, as he rolled over on his chair to take the thermometer out of Nadia's mouth. "You all live so close, it's a wonder only 30% of you've had the fever so far. But that is too many." "Am I good to go?" Nadia asked while he stared at the thermometer. "Your temperature is a little high, Nadia, but with your half-breed side, that can be normal." "It is for me," she said, not knowing if it was true or not. "I feel fine." "I know it's exciting for a Bolt to finally be allowed out on such a crucial mission, but I think you should rest. You've been through a long bout of the fever already." She nodded. She'd been confined to her room because she'd been well enough to rest there. "And now I feel better. I swear," she lied, surprised at how easy it came. The lich fever had been a blessing in disguise in its own way. "I heard you're all looking for that hybrid," Dr. Pernier went on. That's dangerous at the best of times. Are you sure you're being truthful with me, Nadia? Nadia didn't offer a reassuring smile. The man had worked here long enough to know that would be out of place. I only recently got my appetite back, she said. I might not look perfectly healthy, but I feel my strength returned. My wolf half provides much, despite not showing itself. Dr. Pernier didn't seem convinced, but he nodded nonetheless. Do not hesitate to come back if you need more medication. You should not be contagious any longer. And for goodness sake, do as the blade says and report it and stay away if you come across that hybrid, yes? Of course, Doctor. They first and foremost trained me to use my brain. Egos were not useful or appreciated among the Wraiths. Very well, then, he said, and led her to the door. Good luck. Thanks, she said, and kept quiet through the sick ward, not wanting to disturb the fever-ridden Wraiths in the beds there. She felt guilty for lying to the doctor, but then she had been lying a lot lately. The fact that Darrow Region, now known as Tracandis, was her former boyfriend, wasn't even her biggest secret or problem. Only an added one she didn't need today. Chapter 2. Hurrying was not an option. Even if she'd been able to, there were Wraiths everywhere, gearing and teaming up to head out into the city to search for the creature terrorizing everyone. Nadia found a quiet corner in a short hallway that led into a few utility rooms and leaned against the wall, unseen by those who came up and down the main stairs. She had so much to do, and all she longed for was to lie down and sleep, to let her body heal. Dr. Pernier wasn't wrong about that. But there was more than the Tracandis case going on. Nadia closed her eyes and inhaled and exhaled slowly, calming her body. Her mind refused to do the same. Tracandis. It was such a strange name to her. She knew the Earthsiders who'd given it to him referred to his fractured mind. It was difficult to fathom that the boy she'd known her whole life as Darrow now drew fear into the hearts of every Agarthan. There had been nothing evil about him. She doubted there was now too, but the vampire who now shared his body with his werewolf half, or third, she figured, had torn Darrow's mind to shreds and left him raving mad, in no control of the beasts within. And those beasts raged a ferocious battle for control, no doubt. She'd heard more than enough stories about such abominations, but never had she dreamed one would come true. And his poor mother. How was Nilafar going to get through this? Nadia fought back tears at the thought of the woman who'd helped her and her brother Nikolai when their mother had died. It was all heartbreaking. Wraiths did not deal in heartbreak, and besides, Nadia had, despite the severity, more important matters to tend to, and today was strangely the best day. In an hour or two, there would hardly be any Wraiths left inside the cube. The dizzy spell subsided somewhat, but her sore body did not let up. The inside of the cube was one thing, the outside, with a werewolf-vampire hybrid, was another entirely. She needed to be on the alert, and she could hardly stand up. Before doing anything, she knew she needed two things: weapons and food. The latter was easiest. Nadia trudged up the main stairs to the mess hall, where she found what she needed. She'd lied to the doctor about her appetite. It had not returned. She knew it should have, but her lack of rest, all the worry and her planning had left her not managing. Every bolt learned about the necessities of proper nutrition early on, and the mess hall was always open, ready to accommodate the Wraith's every dietary needs. Nadia knew she wouldn't get better unless she began eating properly again, so she grabbed some waya fruit for its nutrition and sweet taste and brought them with her, munching on one of them without registering the taste. Her next course of action was weapons, specifically silver ones. She couldn't risk running into any creature inside the shade, hybrid or not, because she wasn't sure she could fight them off. She took pride in her sword, but lifting it was a chore now. How she hated feeling this way. She'd worked so hard toward her goal of becoming a shield wraith, and right now, she was hardly fit to be a bolt. Nadia went back down the stairs again and headed for the main armory on the floor under the mess hall. The place crawled with wraiths looking for the same things as her. "I'm telling you," a shadow wraith said to some shields, "it's empty." Nadia sighed quietly. She wasn't just looking for silver weapons, but a more useful and valuable tool, too. "I hear the bland asphodel has been taken from every armory," another shield said. "Just goes to show that sticking to groups is a good idea today. Even hybrids can die against such odds." Nadia moved away from the group without comment. She knew the other wraiths were right. Hybrids were not immortal and unkillable, but they were said to be hard to vanquish with all their added strength and differing powers. And then there was the fact that they were talking about taking the life of someone she knew, someone she'd loved. Like a good wraith, she pushed any thoughts threatening to disrupt her to the back of her mind and went further down in the building until she came to one of the smaller armories. She entered the room and found it empty of wraiths, but filled with all kinds of blade weapons, crossbows and bolts, spears, and assorted impact weapons. Nadia wasn't looking for any of those. She headed to the shelves farthest away from the door and began going through the bottles and pouches of potions and substances there. Near the section marked Bland Asphodel, she found a disturbing lack of the dried flower. She already expected this to be the case, but was disappointed nonetheless. The Bland Asphodel, a dried version of a plant native to Agartha called luminescent asphodel, was the best tool for hiding one's scent when hunting particularly dangerous beasts, and the city was full of those. Next to the open space of the shelf, though, lay a small black pouch that looked nothing like the brown ones it lay next to. They were filled with various herbs. Nadia looked up at the shelf above and read silver dust on the tag there. Finding this promising, she carefully opened the black pouch and then withdrew her hands quickly when the silvery glimmer appeared. Being half-werewolf meant she couldn't touch the precious metal in any form without pain and skin irritations. In high enough amounts, it could kill her, like it could full-blooded wares. Nadia reached for the gloves on her belt and put them on, before she tied the pouch back up and fastened it to her belt, taking the gloves off again. "Bolt, Nadia." She barely contained the jump her body wanted to perform at the sound of the voice. She had heard no one approach. Nadia whirled around and promptly wished she hadn't. A dizzy spell took hold, and she had to fight to look neutral and in control. "Spectre Terrace," she said, when she laid eyes upon the man, or half-elf, which was what he truly was. Terrace was tall with blonde hair and long and gracious legs and arms. His face was handsome to the extent of being beautiful, but something about his features marked him as not quite human. As a spectre wraith, he'd reached the second highest position a wraith could, and part of that duty was to make sure the cube and its residents ran smoothly. "I didn't hear you," Nadia went on, and immediately wondered why she'd said that. Of course she hadn't heard him. He was an elf, and she was sick. Hopefully, he'd write the unnecessary comment off as her being a bolt. They were allowed a little leeway because of their young age. "Is there anything special you're looking for?" Terrace asked her while he came inside the armory and headed straight for the crossbows. Terrace favored a sword, but today was a day to acquire extra weapons. Tricandis was no ordinary beast, especially if the specters were also heading out. With their administrative duties, they took on few cases, but when they did, it was usually something special. They had advanced from the rank of shadow and had skills and experience that should not be wasted. "I was looking for some bland asphodel, Spectre," Nadia said. That was part of the truth, at least. She couldn't very well admit to be looking for silver because she was too weak to fight. That wouldn't do. "I hear we're out," Terrace said, inspecting a crossbow he'd picked from a rack. "Yes, seems we are. I'll be out of your way." She hurried to move past him, but he looked up from the weapon then. "Nadia, are you fit to do this today?" Nadia stopped and closed her eyes before she turned back and looked at him, her eyes as bland as the no longer luminescent asphodels. "Of course, Spectre. Why wouldn't I be?" "You look pale, Bolt. You've been out with the lich fever, no?" "Yes, I have. But Dr. Pernier cleared me." "Did he now?" Nadia nodded. "I just look pale, Spectre." Terrace eyed her openly. It was like he was noticing something he couldn't pinpoint. Like her, he had enhanced senses and added agility and strength, but she didn't think any of that should help him right now. Unless she'd overlooked something. "You are not contagious, then?" he asked, finally. "Absolutely not. The doctor wouldn't let me run around chasing hybrids if I were, would he?" She needed him to back off. Being confined to her quarters wouldn't stop her, but it might get a few wraiths asking questions if they spotted her out in the streets later. And she needed to leave the cube for a while today. In that sense, Tracandis's chaos creating had come at the right time. Terrace smiled then, a sight so rare, Nadia froze. That was to say, a fraction of the corner of his mouth went up. "You have no idea how much wraiths lie to the doctor about how well they're doing, do you?" "Pardon?" "Never mind." He waved it off and focused on acquiring a few bolts for his crossbow. "Follow the blade's orders and stay with a group." "Of course," she lied, still surprised at how good she'd gotten at it. "You're close to advancing to shield, Nadia. It would be a shame to lose someone so promising to foolishness." "Wouldn't dream of it, Spectre." Nadia hurried out before he could detain her any longer. The last thing she needed was to be included in whatever group he was leading. She took the stairs again, and this time headed back up, past the mess hall and up to the Wraiths' living quarters. They were spread out over the 4 top floors of the cube. The lowest level contained the Bolts who slept in dormitories, but as rooms, in actuality small apartments, became available, the older Bolts were assigned their own spaces. Nadia had been so lucky about a year ago, and that privacy had become paramount lately. She hurried upward and then had to slow down. Silently cursing herself, she kept at it, but walked slower up the steps, and was pathetically relieved when she reached the correct floor. She drew a deep breath and walked down the hallway to her own door where she stopped. Nadia looked up and down the hallway, but she was alone. Few wraiths would be up there now anyway. She knocked 3 times and then paused before she knocked a 4th time. The seconds ticked by. Then she heard the lock click open on the inside, but the door didn't open. Nadia did that herself. They couldn't risk anyone but her being seen. She slipped inside and closed the door behind her. She locked the door again, and then turned to greet the young woman cradling an infant in her arms, rocking it back and forth while it slept. "Hi, Victoria," she greeted her. "Did anyone suspect?" Victoria asked her. Nadia shook her head and held her hands up in a placating gesture. "Of course not. You're safe. Both of you." Chapter 3. "What's going on down there?" Victoria asked, keeping her voice down despite the soundproof walls around her. It was one of the good fortunes of the thick granite walls of the building. Except through the shoddy pipes in the bathroom, no one could hear what went on in the rooms. That included the wails of a baby. Nadia eyed the little one being kept calm and asleep by gentle, rhythmic rocking. It was a strain on Victoria. Nadia could see her arms nearing a state of exhaustion. "You should sit down." "I know, but I just got her to sleep. It's been so peaceful for the last half hour." She did what Nadia said, though, and sat in the soft chair near a sofa and a coffee table. Nadia's apartment wasn't big, but then, few people in Agartha had large and roomy spaces to live in. In a city that had almost reached its expansion limit in its vast underground cavern, few had or needed more room. Nadia's apartment was like any other in the cube. The entrance led straight into her living room/kitchen combo, where the kitchen made up a sink, a bench, a hot plate, and a cabinet on the wall over the rest of it. Further in, next to the window, stood her bed on a raised dais, simply because she enjoyed being woken by the sun in the morning. The Agarthan sky was a mere magical reflection of the sky above the surface, but it felt real. Next to this main room was a small bathroom with a toilet, sink, and a shower. Wraiths needed no more. "You should sit down yourself," Victoria said, and she relaxed, keeping the sleeping infant secure in her arms and lap. She drew a sigh of relief. Her skin was as pale as Nadia's, the exhaustion clear on her youthful face. Her hazel eyes were ringed with red from the strain of the last few days. Despite the quality of her blouse and skirt, they were now crumpled, and she'd get a lecture from her teachers at court for not taking care to appear proper. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, too simple for court. Lady Victoria Vizora was a child of courtiers over in the palace, and as such, she'd been schooled together with the bolts of the cube for years. But classes in etiquette and dancing were not on the curriculum for the Wraiths. As part of one of the Queen's 2 guards, the bolts were given the privilege of the same education the courtiers got, and they spent a lot of time together for many years. Victoria, being the curious and strong-willed personality she was, had simply gone up to Nadia on their second day of school together at the age of 12 and declared that they would get along splendidly. She'd been right. And now they were not only getting along but were caught in a severe bind together inside the cube. Nadia drew a sigh of relief and steered toward the sofa. She sat and then simply lay down, her body thanking her profusely for this respite. At this point, showing weakness in front of Victoria didn't seem that important to avoid. Nadia couldn't sleep, though, and remained on her side with a cushion under her head, watching the two in the chair. "It's nearing chaos out in the streets," Nadia told Victoria. "It's Tracandis." Victoria nodded and looked like she was about to fall asleep when she closed her eyes for a moment. "Tracandis? Broken mosaic. You mean Darrow?" "Yes." Victoria opened her eyes and nodded. So, the rumors were true then. Who would have ever believed that to happen? It's an abomination. A vamp, a were, and a human in the same body. It's like the beginning of a bad joke. A nightmare, more like. Victoria looked at her, sympathy all over her usually shrewd and playful face. "I'm sorry that happened, Nad. I know you loved him." "Yes, well, it doesn't matter anymore. Darrow is no longer with us. He was killed the day that vamp turned him." Victoria sniffed, looking like a haughty courtier in the making. It made Nadia's lips twitch into a weak smile. They had different prospects and dreams in life, but Victoria was one of the smartest people she knew. She had to be to survive in the cutthroat environment of the royal court, where rumors, gossip, and marital status meant more than anything. This was, after all, a city where the nobility couldn't own and enrich themselves on land. That land was up on the surface, destroyed centuries ago. These days, trade through the veil and social standing was everything. "What about our plan, then?" Victoria asked. "We need to go today." Victoria frowned and looked down at the baby. "I thought you said they called everyone." "They did. But that means everyone is on the alert. How are we going to sneak a baby out in front of them?" "I have a plan, sort of." "Sort of? Do you know what will happen if I'm caught with her, obviously trying to hide her?" "Yes." Nadia wasn't lying. Rumors were bad enough, but if the Wraiths caught Victoria, and usually they would, no one at court would disbelieve their story. I hope you do. It's not like either the court or the cube are particularly welcoming of babies. Both institutions are more in the kick people out for breaking rules business. Nadia nodded, the cushion scraping softly under her ear. The room smelled of milk and the baby, the latter a sweet smell that had until recently been unknown in that room. Unknown to her and Victoria both. They were too young to manage this alone, she thought, for the umpteenth time. But every time she was reminded of that, she was also reminded of her training. There was a reason bolts weren't called children. They were regarded as young wraiths with more leeway while they learned the way of the wraiths. She could handle this. She could do this. I'll get you both out, Victoria. I promise. Victoria inhaled deeply and then nodded. If anyone can, you can. She smiled then. I have high hopes for you, you know. I expect you to reach the rank of Spectre one day. Not the blade? Victoria shook her head in obvious disgust. That would make you a true bore. All serious? More serious than the rest of the Wraiths. I know you guys. You're a funny lot when one learns to read between the lines. I believe you're the only one who thinks that. Victoria scoffed through her smile. That's just because I'm more perceptive than most. Nadia met her eyes then and nodded slowly. I guess you are. She lowered her gaze and watched the baby for a moment. The infant girl looked healthier than her and Victoria, who, for various reasons, were both of them close to exhaustion. Maybe a ghost, Nadia said. Huh? Victoria raised an eyebrow. Maybe a ghost instead of a specter. You want to join the ghosts? You've never told me this. Nadia made an awkward shrug in her position. I suppose it never came up. It's a far-fetched dream anyway. The ghosts, the Queen of Agartha's second guard, were her appointed bodyguards, and they resided in the palace with her at all times. But while the Wraiths were more in numbers and recruited among all social stratas, except for full-blooded creatures of any kind, the ghosts kept to a more select pedigree. They usually recruited among the courtiers' offspring. Not all children could inherit their parents, and a career among the ghosts was a noble choice for many. Of course it isn't far-fetched, Victoria argued. It's an obtainable goal. They do sometimes recruit from the Wraiths. You'd have to at least become a shadow first, though. Nadia raised a hand and indicated her indisposed self on the sofa. I'll get right on that. Victoria chuckled and then remembered herself. Eyes of horror turned down to the baby, but she slept on. All right, she said. What about the plan? This thing with Darrow has riled everyone up. That's what's going to help us. How? With Wraiths everywhere? They're not, though. They're all going out to hunt Darrow as we speak. There will hardly be a single one inside the cube. One Wraith is one too many. You guys are highly attentive to your surroundings. Yes, but this is our best shot. The entire city is in a frenzy about Darrow. He's gone completely insane, Victoria. He's killing innocent people. Victoria nodded. I haven't read a newspaper in 3 days. She looked down. Since this little troublemaker came along, but that was about the gist of it then, too. Yes, they only confirmed his identity today. Victoria looked at the ceiling a moment, thinking it all through. So, she said, and met Nadia's eyes again. Victoria looked as tired as Nadia felt. Today, then? The same plan? Yes. I'd love to wait until we're both in better shape, but it has to be today. The longer we stay like this, the more questions are going to be asked. We're already acting suspiciously. You have barely set foot in the palace. It's now or never. I don't like it, but I won't like it later with more Wraiths in the cube either. So you're ready? Yes. Well, it depends on her, Victoria added, and indicated the baby with a look which then remained on the little girl. She'd opened her eyes and was staring up at the young courtier. Nadia frowned. It's funny how her eyes are so light. She'd seen it already, but hadn't had much pause to reflect on anything, let alone the baby's eyes. My mother, Victoria began, and then swallowed hard. Nadia waited patiently. Victoria's mother had succumbed to the lich fever 4 weeks ago. My mother told me once that I had a sort of light blue eyes when I was born. They changed into their permanent color a few months later. It stumped her too then, but she said it's normal. Nadia thought about it. This wasn't something they learned much about in school, beyond how children were made. Both the Wraiths and the court were adamant their young ones knew about that to be able to avoid exactly this. I suppose it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, Nadia said, and turned over on her back. No, she's beautiful either way. As if to dispute that, the baby chose that moment to start crying. A high-pitched wail escaped her first, before her cries lowered in tone and continued. The shower! Victoria said above the screams. On it! Nadia said and forced herself up. She winced at her protesting body, which wanted to rest independently from what her mind had to say about it. Nadia hurried to the bathroom and turned the shower on as if her life depended on it. The water trickled down and then came in a gush. This did nothing to ease the crying of the child, but prevented her neighbor, who she suspected was not in his room, from hearing anything. She couldn't take that chance, though. The pipes let sound through sometimes, but not when filled with water. Every time the baby cried, they did this, just in case. What does she want? Nadia asked, when she returned to Victoria, who was standing up now, rocking the angry, red-faced little girl back and forth. Sounds like her hungry cry, she told Nadia. Oh, all right. Nadia took a step back, feeling out of depth. I'll check that the route is clear then. After she's fed, we need to pack and get going. Victoria nodded and stepped into the bathroom and closed the door, leaving Nadia a second to exit through the door with the angry cries muffled. She did, and quickly closed it behind her. The hallway was still void of people. Nadia drew a sigh of relief and leaned her head back against the door before she squared her shoulders and stepped away. There was too much at stake here, much more than her own troubles. That baby girl needed help she couldn't get in this realm. The Wraiths helped citizens who were plagued by beasts who overstepped and broke the Queen's law. The Wraiths would never see the baby this way, but Nadia did. Unless she could be delivered to safety, she'd never be free of monsters hunting her. Unfortunately, at the moment, the Wraiths and even the courtiers were the biggest threat against the little girl getting that level of safety. Chapter 4. How do I look? Victoria asked, and indicated herself in a backward wave. The problem with borrowing from a Wraith's wardrobe was the distinct lack of bright colors. Victoria now wore one of Nadia's black, simple shirts under a soft and beige cardigan, which she'd tightened to hide the dark somewhat. It simply wasn't her. Still, she looked more put together considering her blouse had been stained by milk, spit up, and sweat. No one will look twice, Nadia assured her. Victoria had also brushed her hair and pulled it back into a simple, yet more appropriate knot for her, as well as given her face a brush with her rouge. Unless someone were to interrogate her and study her closely, she looked awake and well enough. You forget that courtiers always look twice, Nad. Yes, but for different reasons than the Wraiths, Nadia pointed out. Victoria's smile faded, and she looked back at the baby now placed on Nadia's bed. She slept soundly, happily fed, and with no care in the realm. It was only right, Nadia thought. None of her and Victoria's worries should fall at the child's feet. She couldn't help being born into a situation like this, with a mother who couldn't take care of her because of opinions, rules, and danger from others. Hopefully, she'd sleep through the most crucial part of this day. She seemed to do that a lot, anyway. "Are you ready?" Nadia asked Victoria. "Yes. It's now or never, I suppose, and much as I like you Wraiths, I never saw myself living in the cube. 3 days is long enough." Nadia smiled a tight-lipped smile. "All right, then. Good luck." Victoria nodded, exhaled hard, and then slipped out the door, leaving Nadia alone with the child. She noted the time and then settled in to wait. The baby's tiny chest rose and sank in a slow, even rhythm which she took as a good sign. Nadia figured she might as well use her time effectively. She hadn't had time to meditate properly in the last few days. Too many things had happened, but the Wraiths had techniques to handle the most stressful, dangerous, or traumatic situations. She felt the first category fit best for her needs now and simply sat on the floor by the bed. Her heart rate slowed, and so did her breaths. She felt her mind relax, ready to process the things that were troubling her. It was a long, practiced discipline that now came easy to her, and she could control it well enough to not go fully under. She didn't dare with the infant in the room. A full trance let her completely go somewhere else within her mind, but in a half-trance she could also stay in the here and now, to keep an ear out from any sound from the little girl. It wasn't the best way to do it, but it gave her a brief respite, and when the time came, she opened her eyes and felt a little better, both in body and mind. Nadia turned her head and noticed the little bundle still sleeping quietly. Her little hand had escaped her blanket, which was a cut-off piece of one of Nadia's, and it twitched like she was dreaming. Nadia had no idea if she was, but then, the baby was new to this realm, and despite her only eating and sleeping, and sometimes staring around her, there had to be a lot of new impressions for her all the time. She wasn't even 3 days old yet. "All right, sweetie," she told the baby, and got up, not without a groan. The meditation had done her good, but it didn't do miracles. "Victoria should be ready in 20 minutes. Let's go." The baby ignored her and slept on. Nadia, used as she was to reticent types, didn't let this discourage her. She fetched the small rib basket Victoria had acquired on her short trip to the palace yesterday. It was now filled with a blanket and padding for the girl, as well as a bottle and a thermos with hot water. The odds of them getting through this without the baby needing to feed again were not good. "You're a little glutton, aren't you?" Nadia said, and then shook her head. She wasn't one for talking to herself, and this felt like it. She gently lifted the girl who twitched a little at being handled and placed her in the basket. Nadia held her breath, but the baby fell back into her calm and didn't wake. So far, so good. Which would have been better had she left the room at this point. Nadia hurried to get her weapons and slung her long coat on, buttoning it up from her hip to her chest. Then she lifted the basket, grabbed a coil of long, thin, and sturdy rope, and slipped out the door herself, her lupine hearing telling her the coast was clear. Out in the hallway, her pulse spiked a bit. This was the first time that the child had been outside Nadia's apartment. Not once, since Victoria showed up at her door 3 nights ago, had coming and going been easy. It wasn't going to be this time either, and if she got caught, it might be her last time through the door. Nothing to it. Nadia hefted the basket and tiptoed through the hallways. She used all her senses, trying to stay ahead of any wraith who might still be around so high up in the building, but she couldn't hear, see, or smell anything suspicious. She quickly made her way across to the other side of the cube, for she needed access to the garden out back. The cube garden stretched over into the palace garden and was well taken care of, a beautiful artwork in and of itself. That wasn't what concerned her now. She needed an escape, and the garden was her best option. Nadia had checked the route while Victoria fed the baby, and still couldn't find a better option. She also had to go down 2 floors to reach the right place, which was a bigger risk than running around on 1 level. Nadia had barely gotten down one floor before she heard steps coming toward her. She glanced down at the baby, who looked right back at her. Nadia inhaled sharply and realized if the person coming toward her had enhanced senses, then she'd already been heard. She couldn't know that for certain, though. She looked around and noticed the few corridors leading into the floor she was on, and stepped into one of them. The baby stirred. Not now. If she began crying now, they'd be caught no matter who was right below. No one needed enhanced hearing to notice a baby crying. This, Nadia, had learned with certainty these last couple of days. The lung capacity on this tiny creature was impressive. A small gasp escaped the baby, and Nadia reached down and lifted her. Sleepy, light, gray-bluish eyes blinked at her, and Nadia held the infant close, hoping the comfort would settle her. The steps sounded closer, and Nadia held her breath and focused on lowering her heart rate, hoping the baby picked up on her calm. It was a deep dive trick every bolt began learning their first year among the Wraiths. It was usually used on land to prevent certain beasts with supernatural hearing to pick up on fear and agitation. Until this day, Nadia had never in her wildest dreams thought it was a useful tool for calming tired infants. But it worked. With her ear close to Nadia's chest, the baby was at ease with the slow and steady heartbeat, and she slumbered off again. Out on the stairs, the Wraith walked by, upward still, not caring about being heard, not noticing the utter rule-breaking going on mere meters away. There were no children under the age of 12 in the cube for a reason. Nadia waited for a few beats but didn't have time to stand around. She put the baby back in the basket and was on her way. Unlike the Wraith who'd gone further up, she took great care not to make a sound and soon found herself on the right floor. She hurried past doors to other apartments and soon reached the secluded little corridor she was looking for. It was on the back side of the building and led nowhere but to 2 broom closets. Other than that, it contained 2 small and unadorned windows. Nadia placed the basket on the floor and opened one of them. She instantly spotted a couple of Wraiths out in the garden, but they were moving away from the cube, not guarding it. She waited patiently, and strangely enough, so did the child. Eyes open now, the girl merely stared up at Nadia, regarding her with calm and wonder. The moment Nadia spotted the cloaked figure she expected, she drew a sigh of relief. Victoria had left the palace without incident. The plan had been for her to go in and be seen, so no one would become worried and start looking for her. All classes had been canceled the last few days because of the hybrid running loose in the streets, so that had been a relief too. They only had to get through one more day now, and all would be well. There was only one big hurdle to get through first. Nadia lifted the basket up on the windowsill and began tying the rope to the hoop, and then securing it around the basket itself. She was not taking any more chances than she needed here. "I promise you'll be safe, sweetie," she told the baby, who watched this activity around her basket with detached bemusement. "I'd never let you fall." And with those words, she turned to the window, ready to lower the baby down a 7-story drop. Chapter 5. The steep drop suddenly looked insurmountable to Nadia. She leaned out and saw the distance as something unforgiving, rather than something she could climb down herself with ease. But a small basket and a grown person moved at different speeds, and were not equally hard to notice at a distance. The gargoyles, placed on the wall with their grotesque grimaces, were spread out to the degree that you had to know what you were doing to use them for handholds to get anywhere. Only the most skilled thieves in addition to the Wraiths were good enough for that, and the former group wouldn't dare to break into the cube. Not that the Wraiths had much of value anyway. She saw Victoria come closer until she was directly below the window. Nadia had picked this window and this side of the building because there were fewer people around and no gargoyles were in the basket's direct path. Still, it was nerve-wracking. She'd been allowed to join the Shields and perform their duties in the shade over the last year, and meeting crazed beasts in there didn't seem as daunting as this. She had a new life in her hands now, and it would be unforgiving to drop her. Nadia had the basket on the sill now, and she double-checked her knots again, but she knew how to do this. She had to trust herself. "It's going to be all right, sweetie," she told the baby, and lifted the basket with the infant outside the window. "Just, please, please, please don't cry right now." She eased the basket slowly over the edge, and then the little girl was on her way down. Nadia watched her from the window while she lowered her. Victoria had stopped everything she was doing down there and stared up at the oncoming baby. The girl did not cry. The height didn't seem to bother her where she looked around with wide and alert eyes. Victoria's stance would have told anyone around that something was going on, but thankfully, no one was around to witness this. Finally, Victoria raised her arms and took hold of the basket. Nadia drew a sigh of thankful relief when she felt the rope slackening, and then everything happened fast. Victoria drew a small knife and cut the rope rather than spend time untying everything. Then she looked up and, with a brief nod, she strode off, basket in hand. Nadia quickly pulled the rope back up, closed the window, and then left. With the rope in hand, she hurried back toward the main stairs and went down. She met a few wraiths, and no one looked twice at her. The rope, if anything, only made it look like she was fetching it for someone. Nadia reached the common area where her suspicions were proven true. The place was mostly void of wraiths now, only about 30 of them milling around. Most were on their way out the main doors, and a few manned the front desk. But among those wraiths, she recognized 6 of various types of half-breed shifters. There was no way she or Victoria could have passed through there without one of those wraiths smelling or hearing something. Despite her baby-out-of-the-window plan being ridiculously dangerous, she knew this route would have been impossible. She made sure to keep the rope extra visible and strapped on the coil across her body from shoulder to hip, heading for the back of the house where she found the exit to the garden. No one stopped her. Why would they? They all trusted her. It was a heavy feeling, and it worried her that she was getting used to it. These people trusted her with their lives, just like she trusted them with hers. But she could not trust any wraith regarding this, and too much was at stake. The baby would never be safe in Agartha. Nadia entered the extensive garden behind the cube 8 minutes after Victoria had taken the baby and left the area. They'd meet up a few streets over, and from there, their journey should be easier than it had been inside the cube. An abundance of floral fragrances hit her nose once outside. The garden, an extension of the palace garden, stretched out in its organized beauty. The sun shone up above, and the heat felt as real as if Nadia had been on the surface. Without the city mages controlling the surroundings of Agartha, this place could never thrive. They needed clean water, added air, and sunshine to live in the vast cavern that truly was their home. Of course, even a cavern with all its challenges was better than the damaged surface. The Agarthans had survived here for centuries, and they would need to hold on for centuries to come before going back up. Nadia pulled her hood up to hide her face somewhat and headed along the side of the cube, the dark granite looming over her until she reached the nearest street. There, she noticed an increased number of wraiths. The dark-clad enforcers were easy to spot if they wanted to be seen. They were only uniform in colors and weapons, and therefore stood out from regular citizens, easily recognized for who they were. But hiding and hunting in the shadows was not restricted only to beasts in Agartha. Nadia knew to take care and seem as inconspicuous to her fellow wraiths as possible, though she thought this an unusually high representation of them. She kept her head down and navigated around the wraiths to avoid being stopped by anyone. If that happened, she would have to admit to not being assigned to a group of shields. She planned to allude to being out alone to prove herself, an act of stupidity related to ego-boosting the Wraiths did not appreciate. They took pride in belonging to the Queen's Guard and in their duties. Personal goals, unless they involved advancing, were not valued. Hubris got people killed. Still, it would involve a reprimand, and that she could handle. With that in mind, she slipped down a couple of narrow streets between the apartment buildings near the cube. Victoria should already be waiting, and the Wraiths had no business stopping a woman with a baby on the streets. They were safe now, Nadia thought, and walked on, minding to keep her steps light to avoid being heard. As it turned out, that didn't matter. Someone was paying attention to her anyway. She rounded a corner and was about to cross a small forecourt to a fancy building for richer citizens when a figure glided down the nearest wall. Nadia had not been this close to crying out in years. She hadn't heard a thing. And this time, Terrace was innocent. The half-elf could not defy gravity like this. She drew her sword, shoulders tightening, her breath bursting out hard as she tried pinpointing the shadowy creature. "What are you doing?" Nadia blinked and looked around, sword at the ready, adrenaline coursing through her, boosting her body, which for once didn't feel so pained. "Nadia." There. Between the wall and a small, unassuming shed, the figure moved and stepped forth. The first thing she noticed, beyond the threat, and maybe the main reason for it too, were the dark eyes. She met an unsteady gaze, shifting, flicking back and forth, yet intense at the same time, wide open and simply too confused. All of it merged into one, and she could see the turmoil there as clear as the day was around her. "Darrow?" she whispered. Chapter 6. "Nadia, it's me," Darrow said, voice oddly chipper for someone being threatened with a lethal weapon. "Lower your sword." Instead of doing what he said, she took a step back, never wavering in keeping her sword up. "This blade is inlaid with silver, Tracandis," she informed him. "What?" "Nadia. It's me." He indicated himself with his hands, a mask of bewilderment at her behavior mixing in with everything else. Darrow was the same age she was, and usually healthy-looking and handsome. Now he appeared as a starved apparition of what he had been mere months ago. His dark hair, which he usually kept short and tidy, was messy, standing on end, filthy and too long. His clothes were worn and stained, and she didn't want to know what with, though unfortunately, her lupine nose knew that dried and old, metallic scent well enough. She'd just never encountered it on him. "Nadia, you need to listen to me. I've been looking for you, waiting so long." She took another step back when he tried approaching. His eyes flicked back and forth like he was seeing things that weren't there. She'd felt her heart break when she'd first heard the news about him, but seeing it for herself brought it all back. "It's all true," she said, more to herself than him. She'd known. How could she not, with all the violence, death, and fear in the city? Seeing it, though, was almost unbearable. "You're mad." "Mad?" His brows lowered and he shook his head, then burst out a bark of a laugh. "Ha! No. Not you too. Everyone keeps saying that. I'm not mad. I see everything clearer. Nadia, listen to me." "Don't come any closer, Tracandis," she told him, hefting her sword. She didn't want to use it, and despite the adrenaline keeping her alert now, she knew her body couldn't follow up, not in the long run. "Stop saying that. It's me, Darrow." His eyes flicked back and forth, then settled on her for a fraction of a second. "You smell different." Nadia looked around for an escape and saw that she'd backed herself up against the wall. What a mistake. This was maybe forgiven in a 12-year-old bolt, but not one with her experience. She was not a stranger to wares or vamps, but this one had her rattled. Her breaths were shallow and her pulse raged, and Darrow could hear it. He frowned and shook his head. Then he looked sideways like someone was there, talking to him before he eyed her again. You're afraid of me?" The hurt was evident in his slow, disbelieving headshake. "I am not," she said, because she felt she had to, but the proof was there. Try as she might, she couldn't get herself under control. The deep dive tactics didn't work. "Yes, you are. I don't understand." For a moment, he looked so innocent. He genuinely thought she had no reason to fear him. His face, which was so familiar to her, handsome and young, looked ravaged with despair. And yet there was something new there. Something enhanced, she thought. There was something beautiful there, at first sight, yet utterly preternatural when scrutinized. This was not her Darrow. "You're an abomination, Darrow," she told him. Antagonizing him might not be a good idea, but lying, despite her recent actions, was not something she usually did, and a Wraith never bowed down to an enemy, especially with flattery. It wasn't in them, and an enemy this creature was. The word abomination drew him back. His eyes flared, and he twitched like he was trying to ignore voices in his head, his utterly fractured mind. "At least you remembered my name," he snarled at her. "What do you want?" she asked. She might not be able to hide her fear of this hybrid, but she was still in control of her actions and words. I've been looking for you for weeks. Weeks? Why? I didn't mean to vanish on you. I know you wanted to see if ending things between us was for the best, but I disagree. Long-term relationships are not encouraged among the Wraiths, Darrow. I told you this." She had not lied. She had loved him, but her path in life lay with the Wraiths, and though they were free to have casual entanglements, serious ones were not allowed. Nor was starting families, and so the second cause for a Wraith leaving the fold was choosing a partner over the Queen's Guard. The first cause was death, and most Wraiths went that way. "Maybe your long-time plans with the Wraiths aren't your best option," he argued, completely missing the point. Their former relationship no longer mattered because of the cruel twist fate had given him. "They are now," she told him. "Nadia? I'm not going with you," she hammered in. "You've killed people." "So have you. Not to feed on them. I raise my sword if there's a threat to me or someone else." He eyed the sword, then blinked frantically, almost choking on a laugh. "Turn yourself in." He looked up then, eyes wide and mouth open. "No, there are Wraiths everywhere. They're all out to kill me. Do you know how hard it was to stop you here so I could see you and talk to you?" She stopped herself. Yes, she did know that, come to think of it. She had thought there were a strangely high number of Wraiths around. Someone must have spotted Darrow nearby during the day. He might have been skulking about for weeks while she'd been cooped up in her apartment, but it was today they'd sent out a mass search party to locate him. Darrow huffed and bit his lower lip. "If you'll only listen to me—" "You are now something other than the Darrow I knew," she said. "There is nothing to listen to. You feed off of people now. Innocent people." "I do not." His disturbing gaze roamed everywhere but on her. "You admitted it 10 seconds ago. Stop lying." "I'm not. He twitched and then leaned sideways, eyes closed shut as he winced in some sort of pain. Then his appearance changed, and he shifted right in front of her, the vampiric side taking over. The bloodthirst and lack of guidance from a maker had to be tearing at him just as much as the werewolf in him, which was fighting the transformation. This time, the vampire won. And Nadia, who was no stranger to vampires, watched her childhood friend and former boyfriend turn into the horrid creature that vamps were. His skin took on the pallid and waxy complexion of the dead, his ears took on shredded edges, and his fingers and nails elongated to the point of claws. This was the price all vampires paid for their enhanced beauty and undead lives. The worst was the ice-blue eyes that turned on her. There was no forgiveness there, only hunger. Nadia drew her dagger with her free hand. She might be weakened, but she was not going down without a fight. "No!" Darrow snarled, showing his sharp fangs. Nadia couldn't understand how he wasn't in pain from the sunshine. His hybrid status protected him and strengthened him. His head twitched again, the ever-warring sides in him tormenting him. "No," he repeated and stepped back. For a moment, she saw him raise his arms as if to stop her from seeing him. Then, he quickly turned back into the bedraggled version that now remained of Darrow. "And you're trying to tell me everything is fine?" she said, not lowering her dagger either. "Nadia," he said, breathing heavily, anger and shame marring his face now. "I don't—" He snickered and then forced a smile away. He was right about one thing, though, Nadia thought. The nearby streets were filled with wraiths on high alert, looking for him. And Victoria was waiting. Nadia should have met up with her by now. Before he could say anything else, Nadia drew a deep breath and did something she hadn't done since joining the Wraiths. Something she hadn't done since she was a little girl. She screamed. Her vocal cords still knew the trick. The scream rose between the buildings, alerting anyone nearby to something not being right, of someone in trouble. Darrow was shocked out of his already confused mindset. He froze, and for a moment, Nadia saw calm in the confusion and pain in his eyes. This was not how Wraiths behaved, and he knew it. Well, Nadia was on a mission more important than Wraith customs today. Before he could say or do anything, she bolted. Nadia winced at her now protesting body and knew the only reason Darrow hadn't caught up with her was because of surprise. She headed straight for the front door to the apartment building nearby, and thankfully, it opened. She slipped inside and slammed it shut. The moment she turned to look outside, she saw Darrow close by, his insanity not outweighing the need to understand her bizarre actions. Wraiths didn't act like this. She didn't act like this. He didn't reach the door, though. Nadia had no illusion about which of them were the strongest or the fastest, even when she was at her best. But dark figures appeared farther down the street, a few from between the other buildings. Hurt and confused as they were, Darrow's inner beasts were not distracted from danger. When the first Wraith attacked, he turned from the door to meet the onslaught. Chapter 7. 4 Wraiths honed in on Darrow, circling him, weapons at the ready. Nadia moved back a bit from the narrow window next to the door to avoid being seen. She couldn't risk her connection to Darrow getting any more attention, even now. The Wraiths moved with eerie calm. They were determined and threatening. Nadia watched them and recognized their little signs of communication. Then, the first of them attacked, a lethal blade swinging against Darrow's head so fast any other beast would have fallen right there, or at least because of the second strike from the other side, a mere second later. But Darrow was running on preternatural instincts now. Nadia pressed her lips together as she watched the boy she had loved react without thinking or controlling anything around him. He shifted into his new vampiric form so incredibly fast, lashing out against the 4 Wraiths, who attacked and protected themselves with a detached focus matched by few other Agarthans. Nadia heard the clangs of blades against claws, the screech of the vamp, a high-pitched and husky mix of a sound. It ran through bones. Then Darrow shifted again, and Nadia, despite the violence and danger to her fellow Wraiths, felt a lump in her throat. Darrow's familiar form, the bipedal lupine creature with a thick gray pelt, felt recognizable to her. But his yellow eyes looked just as crazed as his human ones. Snarls and growls escaped him, and he turned back into the vamp. It was like he couldn't decide which form to take, or more likely, he had no control. Nadia stepped back and shook her head. It was too much. She already had so many problems, and now this. Victoria. She needed to focus on what mattered first, and Victoria and the baby were waiting. She couldn't remain here, and besides, in her condition, she was no help to the Wraiths who were more experienced than her. She noticed more arriving up on the nearby roofs. Darrow might be a hybrid, but he was not unbeatable, only hard to kill. The thought of his death made her shiver. It didn't sit right with her, but neither did his hybrid state. It was a horrible situation with no good solution. Nadia turned then and noticed a man standing still on the nearby stairs, a trash bag in his hand. "Is there a back door?" she asked him, trying to pretend to herself that no one else would have heard him either if they'd just escaped a hybrid. "Straight down there and to the right? First one on the left after that," the man told her, used as any Agarthan to take a Wraith seriously. He couldn't possibly know what rank she held. "Don't go out there," she told him, and headed toward the back door. "I'll go wherever I please," he uttered. Oh yes, most Agarthans respected the Wraiths and what they could do, but there was resentment too. "Fine. Enjoy your fight with Tracandis, then." "Tracandis? The Terror?" "Out on your forecourt now." She didn't stay to talk to the man, but ran through the corridors and found her way out on the other side of the building. From there, she quickly navigated to the correct street and found a lonely and cloaked figure there. "Where have you been?" Victoria hissed when Nadia reached her. "I thought something happened to you." Nadia noticed the basket was gone. "Something did happen. Where's the basket? I can hear her," she added. Victoria looked around, but no one was near enough to hear or see anything. She opened her cloak slightly and revealed the baby, strapped to her upper body in a kind of sling made from the girl's blanket. "Makes it easier to carry her. Less strain on my arms." "Smart," Nadia said, and met the infant's gaze a brief moment before Victoria closed her cloak. "What happened?" "What?" Nadia said, and looked up to meet her friend's gaze. "You said something happened." Nadia nodded and steered Victoria out onto the nearest street so they could get as much distance between them and Darrow as possible. Darrow showed up. "Showed up?" "As in, found me the moment I stepped off Wraith property. He'd been waiting." She told Victoria everything while they walked through the streets of Agartha, noting fewer people out than usual. No wonder, since people were genuinely afraid of meeting Tracandis. The odd car drove by, the vehicles large and clunky gray ones produced in Agartha. Only the wealthy could afford those, and so, crossing streets was often of little risk. "This is bad, Nadia," Victoria said. "With all this," she indicated the baby under her cloak, "maybe we should wait until another day. We got her out of the cube. Not one Wraith or one courtier saw. No, we have to do this now. We'll never get another chance like this. But if Darrow's looking for you?" "I know." Nadia stopped and looked across the street. "The owner of that shop is not afraid." Victoria followed her line of sight and nodded. "A witch's shop?" "We need to cover our trail. There are many a Wraith inside the shade, and some are gifted with excellent senses of smell." Victoria nodded. "All right, let's be quick about it." They hurried to cross the street and entered the shop a moment later. As a witch shop went, this one followed all the standards. Nadia's sensitive nose was attacked by all the herbal scents from the dried ones hanging from the ceiling to the fresh ones behind the witch's counter. Shelves with bottles of potions, crystals, and incense were numerous, but Nadia knew the truly potent stuff was in the same part of the shop the fresh herbs were. "What can I help you with?" the witch proprietor asked. She was a middle-aged, bony woman with a friendly enough face despite her occupation. "Oh," she blurted, eyes widening. "Half-breed werewolf and a—" The woman craned her neck. "Is that a baby's aura I detect coming from under your cloak, miss?" "Is that important?" Victoria snapped. "I suppose not." The witch shrugged, a small smile on her lips. "We're here for bland asphodel," Nadia told her. "Do you stock it?" "Of course, but it won't come cheap, Wraith." "Nothing ever does." Victoria shook her head. "Name your price, witch. We're in a hurry." The witch smiled properly then. "A grand lady you are, then? And in a hurry to hide a baby." Victoria rolled her eyes. "And with a wraith for protection. Fancy that. Oh, I have the bland asphodel for you, all right. Let me get it." 2 minutes later, they exited the shop, a bag of bland asphodel in hand, several coins less in Victoria's purse. Nadia didn't waste time. She handed Victoria some of the dried leaves and took some herself. They both crushed the leaves by rubbing them in their hands before reaching up and drizzling themselves with the dust of the flower. Nadia at once felt the scent of Victoria and the baby fade from her senses. It was the useful trait of the flower. When dried and used like this, it would cover any scent. It made it hard for those with an enhanced sense of smell to follow or detect someone by those means. Nadia led the way, heading for the farmlands instead of directly for the shade. The farmlands made up about half the cavern that housed Agartha. The city relied heavily on trade with other realms, but much was grown in the vast fields that suddenly began on one side of several high-rises and then stretched out from there. One perk of not living on the surface, the only one probably, was that they decided what their seasons would be and could grow crops year-round, only alternating the fields to keep the soil nutritious. Nadia and Victoria walked out onto one of these fields, a meadow, it seemed, for all the tall grass and flowers. With no more buildings surrounding them, the shade, the borderland of Agartha, became visible far off. The shade surrounded about half the city, the least of it, farmland. It occupied the area between the wall, the natural border or end point of Agartha's limits under the ground, but half the wall contained the shimmer, the gateways between realms. No one knew why, but the shade had emerged after the city's founding, spreading from the wall like an eerie light of terror. It lay like a shroud over areas that had once been part of the city, but were now mere ruins. The shade brought nothing but horror to the minds of those inside it, and often made people hear and see things that weren't there, though sometimes they were. "Oh," Victoria said when she noticed it. She'd only been through it a handful of times in her life, and, by the look of her face, it had not been enjoyable. "It'll be all right, I promise," Nadia told her. As a wraith, she'd been trained in using techniques to deter and fight off the torment of the shade, and she knew it would be easier on her than her friend. But she would keep her safe, both of them. They hurried across the field and crossed a small river. Nadia knew a more secretive way, one her brother had taught her, but that was impossible with a baby. She kept an eye out for wraiths and saw the occasional one inside the shade, but none that came near. "Ready?" Nadia asked when they reached the shade. Victoria looked up and down at the darkened light in front of her and nodded, yet answered a firm no. Chapter 8. The Queen's Wraiths were prepared for the shade from day one of signing up. Nadia still vividly remembered her first encounter with this vile place. The shade did strange things to a person. No one, including the city mages, knew what the shade truly was. It was widely believed it stemmed from the veil, which always protruded from bedrock with its shimmering openings. So it did in Agartha, but it was speculated that the presence of the underground city had somehow tainted the veil on the Agarthan side. The shade, a shroud of darkened, dingy, and yellowish light, encapsulated everything in its path, and it had spread from the wall toward the city over the centuries. Thankfully, it didn't move more than a few centimeters a year, but it devoured everything in its path, and many ruins of houses now stood inside of it. Nadia steeled herself and fell into the state of focus needed to be inside the shade without being tormented by it. She built up her mental barriers and pushed everything too emotional to the back of her mind. Then she looked at Victoria's frightened face, smiled encouragingly, and nodded sideways, indicating the barrier of eerie light. Victoria sighed and then dipped her chin. They crossed inside together. "Oh, it's awful," Victoria uttered and shook her head, eyes shut like she was trying to unsee something. "Nothing the shade tries to throw at you is real," Nadia assured her, though it wasn't quite true. Sometimes the place made people see and hear monsters, and sometimes the monsters were real. This was also a place where many a beast fled when they were hunted in the city proper. The ground was rocky and sandy, a hard contrast to the fields they'd just come from. Nadia scanned the area ahead and saw what she expected: broken-down houses, the occasional movement in between them, and the wall looming at the end of it all. Up above, the sky was still reflected, albeit with a greenish tint to it when seen through the shade. This place was the first true test of every new aspiring bolt wraith. Many dropped out on that first day. Nadia saw the determination in Victoria's face as she pushed on, staying by Nadia's side, and recognized that resolve from her own first time inside this place. She'd held on then, because she knew there was a way to survive in there, just like Victoria held on because she trusted Nadia to protect her in the same place. She would not let her friend down, nor the baby. "How is she?" Nadia asked, while they walked quietly, yet with some speed to reach the wall. Victoria opened her cloak to reveal the baby, who now slept again. The little girl looked snug. "All well, I think." Nadia didn't know any better, and they could only hope they were right. "Are you sure about the children in the shade thing?" Victoria asked. They'd been over this before, but Nadia understood the need to ask again. Yes, the shade won't harm her. Every wraith knew small children were unaffected by the shade, and like with the phenomenon itself, no one knew why children were so resistant in their early years. But merchants and other travelers came through the veil every day, and many had their children with them. It wasn't until they reached the age of 5 or 6 that they seemed to be affected. This was a small comfort when they needed to bring a newborn this way. "Where to?" Victoria croaked a few minutes later. She didn't look good, eyes squinting and with a stiff set to her mouth. "Over there, to the right, almost at the edge of the shade." Nadia pointed the area out to her. It wasn't a long walk, yet it would feel that way to Victoria. That's where the right gateway is. How did Nikolai even find it? Nadia smiled a tight-lipped smile. Out of the two of them, and for once, she was the only one capable of doing that. He longed for the Earthside realm and their technology. "I know, such a strange boy." "I'd like to hear you say that to his face." He was. What do Earthsiders have that we don't? Except for all their technology, of course. And that's exactly it. He's a half-breed like me. You know all this. Victoria grunted in agreement. Nikolai, Nadia's older brother, had few prospects as anything but someone's muscle, given his heritage. But he'd been fascinated with Earthside technology since he saw his first imported computer in one of the city's local newspaper's publisher on a school excursion. He'd been lost to Agartha after that. And he'd been so set in his fascination that he'd snuck inside the shade to look for places to go to fulfill his dreams. After their mother died, he'd stayed in Agartha to take care of Nadia, but she'd joined the Wraiths, mostly because she wanted to, but also to set him free of his misplaced duty. They'd been young, but they'd both been capable. It had all worked out for the best, until now. "Hey," Nadia whispered to Victoria, who immediately stopped. "Wraith," Nadia explained and pointed sideways. "Hide in there." She indicated the nearest run-down shack. Victoria didn't argue. They'd been over this many times the last couple of days and gone through every possible outcome they could think of. Victoria didn't want them to be separated in here, but she did as told and hurried inside the derelict structure. Nadia turned and moved away, in the direction she'd seen movement. 10 seconds later, she saw she was right. The Wraiths didn't have a checkpoint in this area of the shade. Few people crossed willingly from the farmlands because the larger and main gateways were not placed there. But those fleeing the Queen's law often crossed over in such places, and the Wraiths patrolled everywhere. With her hood up to hide her face, Nadia made herself visible to the other Wraith, who was also alone at the moment. She assumed him, for it was a him judging by build, to be part of a group that had spread out a bit. He signed her this week's signal, and she signed with the correct response before indicating she was searching the area to her right, the area she and Victoria were sneaking through. The Wraith nodded and headed off toward the left, away from her, likely mistaking her as belonging to his group. That meant she and Victoria had little time to reach the wall. The Wraiths were not easily fooled, and it wouldn't be long before this one realized something was wrong. Nadia hurried, as much as she could while trying to be quiet, back toward Victoria. Her body ached, and she longed for some rest. Not before they were through the shimmer, though, she chided herself. She couldn't rest before they were safe, before the baby was. The sound of crunching sand reached her ears. Nadia stopped dead and held her breath. Nothing more came. She looked around at all sides, eyeing every shadow attached to the nearby hovels in varying degrees of degradation, but she saw nothing. Someone had made that sound. She had not. And now there was quiet again. Not even the far-off city echoed any noise inside the shade. She knew that little noise had been made by movement. Nadia felt a prickling sensation on her neck. The shade suddenly threatened to roar inside her head, and she had to focus to push it back where it belonged. The shade quieted around her again, but there was still no sound from anyone, nor was there anything to see. If it was a Wraith, they would let her know, seeing her as one by appearance. Slowly she exhaled, and then set off, still without making a sound. She'd learned long ago to move quietly on the sand, and Wraiths rarely made it crunch under their feet, not if they cared about being heard. She reached the house, and the door to the ramshackle structure hung from one rusted hinge. Victoria sat on the ground inside, the floor long rotted away, her cloak spilling out around her, the baby in her arms. A low-pitched noise escaped the girl who'd awoken. Nadia stopped in the doorway. The last thing they needed now was for the girl to cry. The baby squeaked. They could see her getting agitated. "Not now," Nadia whispered, close to begging. "She's hungry again," Victoria said, rummaging through a large pocket inside her cloak to fetch the thermos and the bottle. "She needs to feed." Nadia drew a deep breath, looked back outside, and then nodded at Victoria. "Keep her quiet. I'll be right back." Before Victoria could respond, Nadia walked away from the house, her attention divided between everything around her. She might not be a shield yet, but she'd been trained long enough and well enough to know that they were not alone. Another, more anxious squeak reached her ears from the house. The baby was about to bawl if she didn't get food. She had to trust Victoria with this. Nadia had to draw whoever was near away from them. A soft rustle, a foot barely touching the ground. Nadia stopped. Whoever it was careless. They certainly had the ability to stay quiet, but were failing. If they were stalking her, preying on her, making these noises was a grave mistake. Unfortunately, she couldn't risk a fight, both for the noise and her annoyingly protesting body. Even her back had begun hurting. Nadia forced herself to think of alternatives and moved toward a larger building. It had all 3 stories intact and had likely once been the home of someone with means. Now, only the general stone skeleton and roof remained. Nadia considered it. A high vantage point might be what she needed. Whatever beast was following her likely had some advantages. This was no regular human. They couldn't keep this quiet unless properly trained. A glance inside the house showed the stairs had rotted and collapsed decades ago. Nadia reached for one of the pockets in her coat and found a small, collapsible grappling hook. Wraiths were prepared for most things. She attached it to the rope she'd been carrying and quickly swung it and made the toss. The hook attached to the inside of the edge up on the flat roof. Nadia closed her eyes for a moment and drew a deep breath. She knew she was going to regret this. More by sheer will than strength did she climb that rope up to the roof. She was embarrassed by her own slow pace and need to lie down on her back when she reached the top. She stared blindly up at the sky, catching her breath and feeling her pulse in all parts of her body. This was undignified. Nadia blinked hard a few times and then froze. The sound came again. A soft rustle of fabric this time. Fabric against stone? Someone passing close to the wall below? Pain forgotten, Nadia rolled onto her stomach and slowly eased herself up. She kept low and moved toward the opposite edge to have a careful look down, but she needn't have bothered. Her stalker had figured out where she was, and instead of Nadia peeking over the edge to spot him, he simply came up on the roof in a half-climb, half-levitating move. The familiar shape landed right in front of her, eyes wild, mouth open to say something, but she beat him to it. Darrow? Chapter 9. Nadia, please listen to me, Darrow pleaded. He looked worse than before, with bloody gashes spread out on his lanky body. He looked so young and innocent in that moment, and Nadia almost forgot the monsters she'd seen back in the city. The wounds the Wraiths had inflicted on him had already healed, or nearly so, the blood still staining his clothes. He looked haggard and wild. How did you even find me? I escaped the Wraiths, followed your scent, and then it disappeared. Yes, it did, because I didn't wish to be followed. But I need to talk to you, make you understand. I figured you went inside the shade. Most other Wraiths are here. Nadia looked around, but thankfully saw no one nearby right now. She also noticed that Darrow was whispering, not talking loudly like he had back in the city. He was afraid of them. How many Wraiths did you kill back there? She asked, dreading the answer. No one. They nearly killed me. I barely got away. Why would you do that to me, Nad? She hadn't done it to him. She'd done it to the Wraiths who'd come running at her scream. She'd risked their lives to save the baby. She could rationalize it all she wanted, but the truth of her actions still hurt. Thankfully, it hadn't cost them their lives. It seemed it had cost Darrow what little had been left of his sanity. He kept looking around, not only seeing things that weren't there, but watching out for oncoming Wraiths. Nad, everyone's lying about me. I'm fine. Fine? Better than fine. You'll see. I can control this. I know you won't. You don't know what I'll do, Darrow. That much is obvious, she countered, also whispering. She had no interest in being found either. Suddenly, her high vantage point had become a disadvantage. They might not be overheard, but they could be seen at a distance. She needed to leave, but Darrow would catch up before she'd taken 3 steps. I don't understand. Why do you hate me? You've never hated me. Nadia felt a pang of regret at his words. "I don't hate you, Darrow. I'm mourning you." "That makes it sound like I'm dead. I'm right here." He stepped forward and reached out, almost like he intended to prove he was real, but Nadia drew her sword in defense. Darrow jumped, not expecting her move, despite this being the second time that day that she'd drawn a weapon on him. His mind truly was playing tricks on him. He was delusional. Instead of lowering his hand, he tried to reach for her sword arm. Nadia moved back and sliced her blade into his forearm. Darrow hissed in pain and jerked his hand back. His face contorted in grimaces of agony, and he shifted through no will of his own into his vampiric shape. The beast lashed out toward the offending weapon, and Nadia parried the strike from the claw-like nails. Darrow's fangs showed as he bent his head backward, those ice-cold blues staring at her, before he shook his head profusely, changing back. Nadia swung her sword again. It was a poor blow, and even a slower creature would have escaped it, but Darrow kept on backing up. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." He stopped right at the edge. Nadia had no idea if he even saw it or if it was luck. He was distraught, shaking his head and alternately giggling, yet she saw his remorse as truth. He had no control despite what he claimed. She focused on her true task at hand that day, and thankfully heard no sounds of a baby crying. Victoria had succeeded. Nadia needed to escape this situation. But her awfully amateurish swordplay a moment ago was proof she didn't have it in her to kill him. He had deserved none of what had been done to him. Still, he was an absolute danger. There was a reason all the Wraiths in the city were out hunting him. She needed to stop him, preferably, or at least slow him down enough to escape. She eyed the edge behind him. Kicking him over wouldn't slow him down much. It would likely enrage him too, and she couldn't rely on the remnants of his affection for her to save her. She was amazed that he managed to be as coherent as he was. "See what you did," she told him. "You attacked me, and you think I should listen to you? Go away, Darrow." "This is my home," he pleaded. "I have nowhere else to go. But if you just come with me—" "Stop it!" Nadia stepped closer. She needed to end this now, either with words or by other means. For all their talk of half-breeds and full-bloods, you are no longer the latter, and certainly not the former either. You're something else now. Something other. Something dangerous that's a threat to all of us. I fear what you'll do to those closest to you, and I have to protect us all. So, no. I will not listen to your lies or come with you. Where would that even be? To your new master's lair? Even if I in some crazed reality did do that, what vampire would welcome a half-breed wraith? And what would he do to me, do you think? Darrow had flinched at her use of the term master, but there was truth to that. A maker could control their new progeny for years after turning them if they wished. He could make you be like me. You don't understand. Do you even hear yourself? That's insane. It's as ridiculous as the myriad of scattered thoughts in your head trying to make sense of anything right now. There is no sense, only chaos. If you ever trusted me, then trust that I'm telling you the truth. The Darrow I knew is dead. I can't believe this, Darrow sputtered and then laughed. His reactions were so polar opposite they made as little sense as he did. He'd fixated on Nadia backing him and going with him. Now, realization was dawning. You've always been on my side, even after you ended things. What's changed? You did. You're lying. You'd never betray someone you care about. If Victoria killed someone, you'd fight to save her from the dungeons. If she killed someone, then maybe. But not murder, Nadia said, and reached for her belt, slow and deliberate. And you've become a murderer. I didn't do that on purpose, he shouted, forgetting their whereabouts. Nadia flinched at the danger that might attract. I'm sorry, Darrow uttered, misreading her reaction. She understood now why she'd caught on to him following her. With both his werewolf and vampire sides, he could move so quietly no one would hear him, but he was too confused and at the same time too focused on getting her to listen that he wasn't paying attention to everything. When instincts took over, he shifted, but not now. He didn't see the danger. I just need to know. Nadia yanked the black pouch free from her belt at the same time she forced her poor body to react fast and forcefully again. With a hard kick to his abdomen, she sent him flying over the edge. She drew a deep breath while taking that one step up to the edge, and before he hit the ground, she yanked loose the string tying the pouch tighter and dumped the silver dust over him, spreading it back and forth to create a cloud of shimmering dust. Nadia felt something burn her left hand, a few grains of silver touching her skin, and she dropped the pouch. She saw Darrow's face contort in pain, and then a piercing scream followed. She heard the blood-curdling screech of the vampire before he shifted forms again. His features looked like they were melting during the transformation. Nadia backed up then and ran. The silver dust floated up and threatened to come back at her. She couldn't withstand that much of it. She didn't even have time to stop and climb down properly. Instead, she jumped over the edge near the rope and grabbed it one-handed on the way down, her grip slowing her descent somewhat. Her hand burned, and then tremors slammed through her legs as she hit the ground in a painful crouch. Nadia couldn't help the half-cry of pain that escaped her then. Her stomach, hips, and back nearly crippled her in their protests of harming an already suffering body this way. It was like she kept fighting her own need to heal. Another scream reached her from the other side of the house. Nad! Darrow choked, and she could hear growls following his calling out to her. The werewolf then. He was fighting the dust with all he had, but breathing it in and swallowing it down hurt more than the particles that coated his skin. Nadia tried holding her breath again, but couldn't. She limped on, angered that a jump her half-breed heritage could usually handle had slowed her down. Thankfully, the silver dust didn't spread around and over the house until she'd run about 100 meters and dared to turn around. It glittered in the air all around the building, and she saw a desperate figure now and then rolling and trying to get up, fighting to escape the poison. Then she spotted the dark, shadowy figures approaching around other houses. Nadia turned and ran before they took their attention off Tricandis and noticed her. Whether or not the baby had finished feeding, they needed to leave now. She was out of breath when she reached the little hovel. I heard screams, Victoria said, out of breath too, but not from running. She stared wide-eyed at Nadia, the little girl in her arms. They were at least done with the feeding. The bottle lay forgotten on the ground, a few drops of formula left. Darrow managed to track me regardless of the bland asphodel. Darrow? Victoria visibly shivered. He's here? Fighting wraiths. We need to go now. Nadia stepped back to allow Victoria space to exit the hovel with the baby in her arms. She hadn't strapped the girl back to her body yet. There wasn't time now. Come on, hurry! Nadia urged as they jogged straight for the wall. A few shouts and many screams and growls reached their ears. The noise didn't seem to diminish either. It sounded like it followed them, yet not right behind them. Nadia couldn't pinpoint it, and she instead focused completely on reaching the wall and the correct gateway. The wall constituted the edge of the cavern that housed the city of Agartha. It was the city's undisputed border. This was where people could travel to and from the realm. High above, the magically reflected sky met the wall, which reflected a light of its own on its rocky surface. The shimmer, the silvery green light that looked like it floated on the rock surface or right in front of it, flickered and glowed in so many places it looked like the rock wall had shimmering holes in it. They varied in size, and all led to one of the 8 realms connected to Agartha. "Here, it's not far now," Nadia told Victoria, and led her along the wall until they reached an uneven part of it, with rock piles everywhere on the ground. Nadia guided Victoria to a nook in the wall, which was hard to notice unless one knew what to look for. "This is it?" Victoria said with hope in her voice. "Yes." Look, Nadia leaned around the jagged edge of the wall, and deep inside the nook, a field of shimmering green light welcomed them. "Just remember to keep her firmly on your front." Nadia eyed Victoria's grip on the child, and was satisfied she wouldn't arrive landing on her. A piercing vampiric screech sounded far off, yet not so far she couldn't see the source of it. Farther down the wall, a twitching figure of a vampire emerged. Then he shifted mid-stride, back into his human form before he jumped forward and vanished through one of the gateways. "Was that—" Victoria began, but Nadia put her index finger over her mouth. A few seconds later, several figures wearing the same coat Nadia was came running before they too went through the same gateway. Nadia turned then, took Victoria's hand, and stepped into the nook before she walked right into the shimmer and let the silvery green light engulf her. Chapter 10. Darkness so encompassing it rendered her blind was the first thing to greet her. Then she became aware of the cold. It was always strange going through this gateway, because though she went through it in an upright position, she entered the earthside realm on her side, lying down in a hollow space under the ground. "Is this right?" Victoria asked right behind her. Nadia had warned her about it, but it was an odd sensation, like being spun around in half a second. "Yes." "Just give me a moment," Nadia told her. She knew with certainty that they were in the right place, because all her heightened senses had become numb and subdued in the non-magical realm. Even the shimmer, one of the few surviving remnants of magic, was weaker here. Nadia felt around and located the small hatch above. She pushed at it and then felt a surge of icy air hit her. Nadia crawled up and then pushed at a rock that lay in her way. From there, she peeked outside. The city her brother had moved to spread out in the distance, lights twinkling in the darkness, a blanket of snow helping to light up everything. Around her, old ruins dominated the area, remnants of a grand time that now only spoke up through the stone foundations left behind by the once powerful people of the city of Oslo. A flat area stretched from the ruins down to a quiet pool of water that connected to the equally quiet fjord. Nadia was more interested in people, but saw only a few of them in the distance. Drawing attention to magical gateways in the non-magical Earthside realm was a bad idea. In this technology-driven world, it would lead to surveillance and no free passage through the shimmer. Nadia crawled out and immediately felt the cold of the winter seep through her pants as she had to put her knee on the ground. She turned and gave Victoria a hand to get her and the baby out. After that, she unbuckled her sword and lay it down in the hollow space. Earthsiders tended to notice that kind of weaponry, and sometimes it created problems. Nadia wished to avoid that. She pushed the stone back in place and walked back and forth over the area to hide any trace that someone had entered from under one of the ruins. "I learned in history class that we used to have winters too," Victoria said behind her. "You know, when our ancestors lived on the surface." Nadia turned and saw her shiver while gently kicking some snow with her foot. "The cold!" Nadia blurted, a wave of panic suddenly hitting her. "It didn't occur to me. I'm awful. The baby, is she all right?" Victoria looked at her and stepped closer, a warm smile on her face now that she was out of the shade. "Nadia, you're not awful. Don't say such things. You got us here, and she's fine. Look." She opened her cloak with one arm, holding the infant with the other. The baby was awake, looking around with the same air of wonder she usually had when not tired or hungry. She lay snug and warm in her blankets, shielded under the cloak against the cold. Your daughter is safe, Nadia. Think about that. She's warm and she's safe. Now let's go and find Nikolai. Nadia exhaled and, for the first time since the girl was born, felt a sense of genuine relief. She reached out and gently brushed her fingers over the girl's face. Her daughter. The words sounded alien to her, yet also felt so right. But the child was not hers to keep. Not if she was ever going to be safe. Nadia looked toward the city. It was a simple walk from here, but no one posed any threat to them on the way. Come on, then, she told Victoria, who closed her cloak to protect the baby from the worst of the cold. It's not far. They began trudging through the snow which had, thankfully, been plowed even in the areas for pedestrians. You think Nikolai will be happy to see us? Victoria asked. A few people looked at them twice. They were not dressed in any typical Earthside style, but no one bothered them. I think he'll be surprised. Huh, I think he's entitled to. I've never met this Axel, though. Nikolai lived in what was called the Old Town, in a small 2-bedroom apartment with his boyfriend Axel. I have, Nadia said. Only twice, but I like him. I am afraid that I'm about to ruin his life. Nadia, Victoria said, and put a hand on her shoulder, one of the few people allowed to do so. Weird as it is, since this is new to me too, but you're a mom now, and you're doing this for her. She's the one who matters now. And if a baby scares the man off, then that's on him. Nadia nodded, and they walked on. Soon they came to the right building, and Nadia rang the doorbell marked Navarra, holding her breath, hoping at least one of them was at home. Waiting out in the cold with a newborn was not a good option. Hello? Came a familiar voice through the call system. Nick, it's me, Nadia, she responded in Agarthan. Nadia, everything all right? Sort of. Can you let us in? What? Yes. Sorry, of course. The door buzzed as Nikolai let them in, and they took the elevator up. It was only 3 flights of stairs, but with no danger around, a complete lack of adrenaline to keep her going, and the toll of the last few days weighing on her. Nadia was beat. She didn't want to admit it, but it was the truth. Nikolai was out in the hallway when they exited the elevator, worry on his face, his brows lowered as he looked at them. Nad! Victoria? What's going on? Nikolai was, like most male werewolves, on the tall and muscled side, bordering on hulking. He had the same dark brown hair as Nadia, only cut short, and the same soft brown eyes. I need your help, Nick, Nadia told him and walked closer. You smell different, Nikolai said, a frown on his face. Used as he was to living in this realm, he had more control of what little remained of his enhanced senses. Nadia nodded. Darrow had noticed that too. Hormones, blood, and an amazing amount of anguish and worry I didn't even know I had in me. This did nothing but deepen her brother's frown, but just then, Axel came walking out of the apartment. Nick? He added something in another language, and then noticed Nadia and Victoria and quickly switched to English, the only Earthside language they had learned in Agartha. Nadia? Are you all right? You look weary. Axel, good to see you. I'm sorry about this. About what? He asked, and looked over Nikolai's shoulder, which he had no trouble with, being a tall man and on the lean side. Nadia turned to Victoria and nodded. Her friend opened her cloak and revealed the baby. There was utter silence in the hallway, only the muffled sound of a neighbor's loud television encroaching on the moment. Then Nikolai stepped aside and indicated the door with a wave of his hand. I think you better come in. Nadia let Victoria do the initial talking. She felt a sense of fatigue no exercise, test, or assignment for the Wraiths had ever left her with. She steadied herself against the wall and didn't have the strength to bend down and take her boots off. Instead, she slowly toed them off, almost losing her balance. "Here," Axel said, and took her other hand, helping her keep upright. "Thanks," she told him with a weary smile, and then walked over to the couch in their living room, the most inviting thing she'd seen since she'd laid down on her own sofa hours ago. She unbuttoned her coat and threw it over the armrest, not caring that anyone in the room could now see the slight rise of her belly that still remained. They all knew anyway. She lay down on her side and watched the other three. "I can't believe it," Nikolai said, and eyed Nadia with a most peculiar look. It was like he was seeing her for the first time. "A baby?" "Yes, Nick," Nadia told him. "They're like tiny humans." He scoffed at her. Ha. Or, in her case, 75% werewolf. Nikolai pressed his lips together and looked at the little girl, still in Victoria's arms. Then something seemed to settle in his mind, and he turned to Axel. "We have nothing in the house for this, but the shop down the street is open till 11. "That's in half an hour," Axel said, and headed for his shoes and jacket by the coat stand next to the door. "Text me what I need. I should get it all in time." Nikolai nodded and grabbed his phone from his pocket and began typing on it. Nadia watched in silent awe at the tiny thing that made everything so effective for her brother. Agartha was a few decades behind the Earthside realm in these matters. Changes in technological matters usually moved slowly in magical realms. Diapers, obviously. Bibs, I guess. Disposable wipes, Nikolai mumbled, thinking out loud while trying to remember everything. "Ointments," Victoria added. "She's developing a rash." "Oh, all right. Some sort of cream. Soap for babies, and He turned and looked at Nadia. "Food?" "She needs formula," Victoria said, before Nadia had to, and she was thankful. She hadn't been able to feed the girl. It was like her body knew it wouldn't last. It had been so distressing she usually left the room when it was time. It didn't help much that she knew it was for the best. She would be spared the physical pain of a forced weaning, but not the emotional one. "All right, and painkillers. They don't have the strong kind in the shop," he added to Nadia with a look of anguish. He could see the fatigue and pain on her face. Victoria loosened her cloak and threw it over a nearby chair. "She gave birth without pain relief. I think she can handle this." Nikolai nodded and typed a few things more and then hit send. He put the phone on the table and then accepted the baby in his arms with a look of utter surprise. The little girl wriggled her hand out of the blanket and grabbed a small part of his shirt. "Gave birth alone?" Nikolai shook his head in disbelief. "I'm calling a friend of mine," he said. "No," both Nadia and Victoria said, used to keeping all this secret. "It's fine. She works as a midwife at one of the hospitals. She knows to keep quiet." He gave both Nadia and Victoria a look that dared them to protest more. He picked up the phone again, the girl resting safely on his one massive arm. "What's her name anyway?" he asked. Victoria also turned to Nadia and looked expectantly at her. Nadia hadn't been sure about this, not until now. "Nilofar." Nikolai lowered the hand he was holding the phone with. "Nilofar?" "After her grandmother." "Honorary grandmother, or—" Nadia smiled a little smile, tired and exhausted. Nilofar had taken in both her and Nikolai after they became orphans, so an honorary title of grandmother was not a surprise. But then, she was also Darrow's mother and therefore a blood relation of the baby. Her actual grandmother. Nikolai sighed and nodded. He'd heard of Darrow's fate a few weeks ago, when it was still speculation that everyone was certain to be true. So, The terror of Agartha is her father. He looked straight at Nadia then. That makes me relieved you came here with her. It was the middle of the night, and the couch had been expanded into a double bed, the large cushions removed, and a duvet and proper pillows put there to keep Nadia comfortable. After she'd first laid down, she didn't want to move into one of the bedrooms. "We're staying the night, right?" Victoria asked her as she sat next to Nadia, and placed little Nilafar, or Nell, as Axel had taken to calling her when he came home from the shop with 8 shopping bags filled with an excessive amount of what they needed. He'd said the baby's full name was beautiful and a mouthful, and Nadia found she quite liked the shortening. It also separated her little girl from her grandmother. "Yes," Nadia confirmed. She'd been given some privacy while the midwife had examined her. Now everyone was back in the living room. "I'm telling you," Henrietta, a red-headed woman in her early 30s, and the midwife, said to Nikolai and Axel. "You have no idea how lucky she's been. An uncomplicated birth is dangerous at the best of times, and this happened with another 17-year-old as the midwife." The 3 of them stood near the door but spoke so Nadia and Victoria could hear, in a language they could understand. "She should be in the hospital. I can take her." "No," every Agarthan in the room said. Axel and Henriette looked at them and then focused on Nadia. "You've been through an incredible strain. You should rest." "I am, and I will." "Really? And that large dagger you're carrying is for what? Sharpening pencils?" "Yes," Nadia said. "Big pencils." Henriette rolled her eyes. "She also has a nasty rash on her hand which should be taken care of." "It's silver poison. It will heal," Nikolai said. "Huh? What does that mean?" "She's half-werewolf, like me. The silver burns, and then the injury heals. We heal fast. Faster in other realms, but she'll be fine here too. There's nothing doctors in this realm can do." Henrietta looked to Axel for help, but found none. "You shouldn't be so surprised considering your boyfriend is from the Elfine realm." "Yes, but he's human." "So?" Nikolai said. "He's not from here, is he?" Nadia knew little of Henrietta's situation, but she knew Nikolai had a small side business of helping people who came to this realm get the right papers. Staying Earthside was difficult without an identity that was written down. Likely he had helped Henriette's boyfriend, and therefore knew she could be trusted to keep quiet about this. "So, what happens now?" "I would at least like to check up on the girl." "That's fine. I'll figure out the paperwork. For all intents and purposes, she's adopted." "Good," Henriette said, and hoisted her bag onto her shoulder. "I'd like to check up on you again too, Nadia." "I'll be leaving tomorrow," she told her. She had to. Staying the night was a risk. She couldn't take the chance of being missed in the cube. Henrietta sighed and turned to Nikolai. "I'll call you in the morning and we'll figure things out. Good luck, girls," she told Nadia and Victoria, and then left, a cab waiting for her outside. "Thank you," Nadia said when the door closed behind the midwife. It was a relief to know things were all good despite the strain on her body. "Don't think about it," Axel said, and sat on the nearest chair. "You're family. So are we, apparently." He looked up at Nikolai. "Just a little sooner than expected." Nadia looked over at her little girl, who now slept soundly after her first bottle of Earthside formula. Victoria reached over Nell and took her hand. "You did it, Nad," she said, sounding oddly choked up. "She's going to be fine." Nadia nodded and squeezed her hand in return. She wondered if she herself was ever going to be fine, though. Chapter 11. The digital clock on the box under the TV showed it to be 3:15 in the morning when Nadia felt the couch dip as Nikolai sat next to her and the baby. The apartment was quiet and darkened, much like the city outside. "Can't sleep?" she asked him. No. Axel and Victoria are, though. I don't want to wake them, he said, keeping his voice low to avoid that. It was a small apartment, despite the extra bedroom where an exhausted Victoria now rested. Nikolai reached out and brushed a finger over Nell's tiny cheek. I'm sorry to burden you like this, Nick. You need to believe me when I say that I would never ask you to do this unless it was absolutely necessary. He nodded and moved his hand back, resting it in his lap. Can you tell me everything? I know you already have, but it's all been a mess of confusion between everything we had to do in a hurry and you and Victoria being drained and worn out. I'm amazed you made it this far. Nadia looked at Nell a moment, that perfect little girl who'd changed everything long before she was born. She kept her gaze on her while she told Nikolai the whole story. I got pregnant a few weeks before I broke up with Darrow, at least by my estimation. I didn't know it at the time, though. I broke up with him because I knew it wouldn't work. I'm a Wraith, and we're not allowed serious relationships or families. I know. So did Darrow. He didn't like it, though. Kept hoping I only needed to think a little and then change my mind. Anyway, I found out I was pregnant, but I never had the chance to tell him since I was in another realm at the time. When I got back, he'd been turned. You don't know how dangerous he is, Nick. I know you have your contacts and keep up to date on the general gist of Agarthan business, but until I saw him myself today, the tales didn't justify the insanity. He's completely broken. He can't even control the vampire infesting him. He attacked me. Nikolai drew a shuddering breath. He'd grown up with Darrow too, and they had been friends. Anyway, I didn't know what to do at first. Thought I'd have to leave the Wraiths, but from all I'd heard of hybrids, and the fact that I knew Darrow wasn't done with us, I didn't dare leave the safety of the cube. So I stayed, and I hid my pregnancy. I never really got too big, and I hid under a wider coat. During the last few weeks, I feigned having the lich fever. It's been going around the city. I heard, Nikolai confirmed. I hoarded food and kept to myself. No one questioned it. I've never been sick before. They had no reason to think I was lying. How does Victoria play into this? Nadia smiled. She's a good friend. That's not up for discussion. No, she hadn't seen me in a while. She came knocking. I didn't answer the door. Then the birth started. I'm telling you, Nick, I've seen a lot of things as a Wraith, but I have never been scared like that. Then after hours of pain, alone in my little apartment, she knocked again. And this time, she didn't leave at my lack of response. She kept on knocking, making a ruckus until I opened and let her in to avoid anyone else being alerted. She helped me through it. I swear, with the pain, I think she was more afraid than me. But she stayed, and she kept on helping me so I could bring Nell here. Victoria's not just a good friend. She's the best there is. I trust her with my life. Nadia paused and moved her hand to the baby, feeling the tiny hand grip around her finger. More importantly, I trust her with Nell's life, and because of that, she's safe now. I could never have done this alone. And Darrow? Nadia inhaled and exhaled slowly. He's the reason I came here. I was afraid it was the case, but he actually confirmed it, more or less today. Confirmed what? That he's a threat to Nell. He wanted me to come with him so his new maker could turn me too. His plan was for us to live together in that state of insanity, to share in the utter, murderous madness. Think of what that would do to Nell if he did the same to her. She's almost a full blood. It would drive her insane. Likely kill her as young as she is now. But Victoria said he found you? How did you escape? Nadia told him. You used silver dust? Are you crazy? Nikolai reached for her free hand. That's why you have the silver rash. I needed to stave off Darrow's fractured mind. I gave birth a few days ago. I couldn't fight him. But also, I couldn't kill him, Nick. For all the monsters in him now, there's still part of him that's human. Clearly not if he survived a fog of silver dust. You're lucky to have escaped that yourself. Nadia nodded and heard a lone car drive by out on the otherwise quiet street. I wasn't 100% sure I'd return to Agartha today, but now that I've seen him, my mind is made up. Unless you disagree, of course. But if you agree, you need to help me keep my resolve. She nearly choked up then, looking at the baby and knowing she needed to leave her here. It didn't matter that she would leave her with someone she trusted with her life. Nikolai would never disappoint her in that regard. She simply didn't want to leave her. She had to. I agree. She'll stay with me. I will take care of her as if she were my own, and you will always be welcome here. Always. You understand? Nadia twisted her hand and took hold of his. They were not the emotional kind, but this situation was too powerful for their regular patterns of behavior. I understand. Thank you, Nick. And I'm sorry if this uproots your life and messes things up with Axel. They were serious, but they were also young. Nikolai was 20, while Axel was 22. You had your whole lives ahead of you. Nikolai smiled then, warmly. It was a rare sight. Don't worry about Axel. He's in a bit of a shock, but he's not going anywhere. And we still have our lives ahead of us, together with her now. He sighed and nodded. I'm amazed at what you've been through, Nad, but I shouldn't be. You can handle anything, can't you? Depends. I've betrayed the Wraiths by having her, and by letting Darrow live and not tell anyone. I've lied and deceived them all. Yes, and now you have to continue doing so. For her. For her, Nadia echoed. Besides, Nikolai said, and let go of her hand and stood. It's all about not being noticed, and Wraiths are good at that. That includes you, little sister. Yes, Nadia agreed, and settled in for her last hours with Nell before she needed to return to the Wraiths to continue her lies. All for her. This has been Silver Dust, a Queen's Wraith prequel. Written by G.K. Lund. Copyright 2022 by G.K. Lund. Audiobook production copyright 2025 by G.K. Lund. If you want to be notified of other audiobooks by G.K. Lund, remember to click subscribe. That way you won't miss new additions to this YouTube catalog.